Hey Gumshoes, welcome to an ad hoc A Murderous Heart live. Like I said in the announcement, I was planning on doing the live on Friday and realized, oh, my daughter and I walk for our graduation on Friday, so that will not work. Anyway, I wanted to make an exciting announcement. I've alluded to this a few times, just over the past few months, that I have been working on an app that would allow users to be able to search across the different trials. And that app is now public. It's, of course, free to use. So let's just jump in. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Can someone just confirm sound before I lose you on the screen? Okay, well, I saw how exciting, so I assume you can hear me. All right, so let me switch. Okay, so this is the app. You can get to it. Actually, you know what? Let me drop the bit.ly link in here. bit.ly, just let me put my glasses on, / DB for Daybell -case -app. Okay, so, or you can just go to Annielytics, and I have a link to it on my homepage. So if you scroll all the way past my other apps to the bottom, and then you can just click the oops, no, that's the wrong link. Okay, use the bit.ly link. I will. Can one of my mods remind me to update that link tonight? Okay. Well, you can also go to tools. Hopefully, well, no, this is going to be the same wrong link. So I'll just type it in here. It's just Daybell case. Okay, so this app uses AI. It's not generative AI. It's not like ChatGPT. And let me explain why. So with generative AI, I would have to train a model on someone else's content. And the only reason I was able to create this app was that Nate Eaton has done such a fantastic job with live blogging the trials, that here, since I'm going to be talking for a little bit, let me see if I can just, whoops, darn it, hate this thing. Well, let me see. Nope. Okay, I'll just leave it as this. Sorry, I just have to do that to move the dock over to my other screen. Okay, so like I was saying, Nate has done such a fantastic job with the live blogging, and that a couple months ago, I decided to reach out to him and to ask for permission to use East Idaho News's content in the app. And I explained I wouldn't be training a model on it. I would just be serving up that content in the app. And you'll see in a minute why that is. But the reason I couldn't use the transcripts is that it would cost thousands of dollars to have the videos from 3 different trials transcribed. It just was cost prohibitive. And so the live blogging is kind of the next best thing. So what I did was I created what's called a scraper, and I went through all of East Idaho News's content, and they have a little piece of code on their pages that identifies what category it's from. Here, I'm going to switch it back to myself until I'm actually ready to do the demo. So they have a little piece of JavaScript that that identifies what category the article is a part of, and they have a category for the Daybell case. So I was able to create an app that would scrape it and basically say, okay, if you find this piece of code on the page, store that article. If you don't, ditch it. Like, I don't need it, because I didn't want all of East Idaho News in the app. And but then, because Nate always put live update or live updates, I think, in the title of just the trial live blogging articles, I was able to then differentiate between like just general East Idaho News Daybell case content versus actual trial content. And that's what I really wanted to isolate. And so that's why on the app you have this filter. You can either, by default, you're just going to search the trial content, but there's a toggle. Let me switch back to the screen because now we are ready to fly. But there's this toggle that allows you to include all East Idaho News content if you are so inclined. Now, that's all East Idaho News content for just this case. So all the articles leading up to the trials, in between the trials, even articles about like Nate's breakdown of that particular day of the trial, and that's all included in this this toggle here. So the way it works is you can just search, just put in a search term. If you want to change it, you can X out of it, or just select it and delete it, and then search. So that's going to be like your most basic search functionality. Now, there is a lot more to this, but one thing I'll touch on is it just kind of worked out because Lori's Idaho trial was in 2023. If you click the 2023 filter, it's just, well, let me go back. Yeah, I wanted to make sure I didn't include all content. Okay, so if I select 2023, then all of these articles will be specifically from Lori's trial. Unless, like, let's say, no, even if they talked about, like at one point they talked about scheduling for Chad's trial, that was still just a small piece of the witnesses for that day. Like, they still had witnesses. So, or if you select 2024, that's going to be Chad's trial. And if you select 2025, that is going to be Lori's trial in Arizona. If Brandon's trial is actually in June, as it's scheduled for, then it will be both of her Arizona trials, because they'll both be finished in 2025. Okay, so now when you click through to an article, let me go back there. You have this link here, view article, and if you click on that or select it, this is totally mobile friendly. I optimized it for mobile devices as well, because I know a lot of our users are on mobile. Then what it will do is it will highlight the keyword, and you also get these little this little simple navigation. If you have access to a keyboard, you can also use your left and right arrow keys. So right arrow to advance to the next keyword match, and left arrow to move back. So you can see I'm starting on the first match. And now, of course, you can also scroll, but I added this just because some of these articles are pretty long and you have to scroll quite a bit. So, I mean, obviously, these are all matches for Tylee. All right, so earlier today, and then we can click on back to search. Now, one thing to keep in mind, though, is if you click or select that back to search option, it's going to wipe out your search. So if you are, let's just say, I'll search for gun, and you can also just hit return if you're on like desktop. If I click back to search, it'll wipe out whatever keyword or combinations of elements I have. If you want to keep what you have, then just hit your back button in your browser. Okay, so earlier today, Janice and I were talking, and she mentioned something at Chad's trial that they said that there were Venmo transactions between, I think it was Lori, Alex, Chad, and Melanie, then Boudreaux, now Pulowski. And I was like, what? I have never heard this. And so I was like, well, let's just look for it. So in this case, I'm still not going to use the include related keywords. We'll get to that in a minute. But it was actually from Lori's trial. You don't have to use that filter, but I found it. I think it was, yeah. I think it was this one, May 4th. Let's just open it up. Yeah. Here we see Smith has no further questions. Thomas says all the discovery today should be exempt because of Idaho Rule 404B. He has no questions. Pillar says there were several Venmo exchanges made between Lori, Chad, Alex, and Melanie. There were also text messages talking about cash exchanges. So hopefully we'll hear more about that at Brandon's trial. Again, it just raises the question, why isn't Melanie behind bars alongside her aunt? I just think it is absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, so, but this is like why I have this. But now here, let's talk about this filter here, because this filter here is what really gives this app its the majority of its power, in my opinion. So if you select include related keywords, like let's say I put in fight and I include related keywords, it will use AI to find. Now some of these are weird. It's like press, engage, defend. That makes sense. Let's just see what this comes up with. Oh, that's just fight. Struggle. You know, these are like AI dictionaries that it uses, and that can be effective. Like if you're searching for a keyword that has like a number of alternatives. But with this case, one thing that makes this case so unique is it kind of has its own lexicon, or like its own custom dictionary. Because if you think about like the keyword, like dark spirit, well, you also have evil spirit, you have demon, a zombie. There are all these other words for dark spirit. And so I created a case specific dictionary. And if the keyword you search for is included in this custom dictionary, instead of using AI, it will use this custom dictionary. And then I documented. Now this is really more for like researchers, maybe like law enforcement, reporters, documentarians, people who really want to dig into the details. I broke it down to one to many and many to many. And that was just because I couldn't think of a better way to explain it. So these one to many keyword groupings allow you to put in one phrase and it will match many phrases. So for me, like when I update my timeline, this all month is absolutely fire, because I can just type in all months, and whoops, forgot to See, now in this case, I don't want to type in all months again, so I'm going to use my browser. But if I include related keywords, it's going to pull in January through December, and then also the abbreviations. And reporters abbreviate, like September is SEPT. It's kind of very, very, very old school. But by including all of these variations, May is also, obviously, it's going to give you some false positives because May is a very common word. And I forced all of the keyword searches to lowercase. If I hadn't have done that, you could have searched for May with a capital M, and it would have only, returned either the word May in the beginning of a sentence or the month. However, that you really never want any kind of search app to be keyword sensitive, because the juice just isn't worth the squeeze. So, but now, like, I can peruse through here. I'll just check this. And if I go through here, you'll see, okay, we have 2 Julys, a March, another March, another July, whoops, February, both abbreviated and spelled out. I mean, this would require a lot of searches. And, again, I mean, you could just, scroll through, or you can use those arrows. Okay, so also days of the week, most people aren't going to need that, but group members. So with group members, if you type in group members, now if I didn't include related keywords, it wouldn't return any results, most likely. Let me just see. Yeah, 0 results, because they don't talk about like group members. But if I include related keywords, then it's going to include references to all of these group members. Now, why don't I have Chad, Lori, and Alex? Because originally when I had them included, it returned every article because between the 3 of them, they were obviously mentioned every single day between these 3 trials. So, and the purpose of this is really more just to, see how these other people, friends and family, contributed to the chaos. I also included 7 gatherers, both with the number 7 and spelled out. And now if you, let me check something here. Oh, just 1 second. I just got an alert. Okay. Now let's say if I open this, and you'll see like Serena's name is spelled 3 different ways commonly. I found 3 different spellings just in the East Idaho News articles. And so I include all 3. But you can see here, we have Serena, Summer, Melanie. This is Melanie Gibb because it has an E. Not sure if Melanie Pulowski. Yeah, Melanie Pulowski is also all through here. And more Summer. But, it will include all of these people. Now, similarly, if we'll go back to search, if I search for kids and include related keywords, I'll search, I'll filter by Chad's trial because that's where we heard about Melanie Boudreau's kids. There were details in there. I think it was on the 16th. Let me open this up. Oh yeah, there's 64 matches here. So this will include obviously Tylee, JJ, but also kids, children, child. Here you see children. It returns matches for that. And then farther down, we will also see Brighton. That's the Boudreaux girl who was identified as a dark spirit. Now, I couldn't include Blake because of Lindsay Blake. Like if I included Blake, it would return all references to Lindsay Blake. But Blake, I believe, is always mentioned vis-a-vis his sister. So there's a reference. Yeah, here you can see on July 20th, Lori texted Chad, "What's Blake's percentage? He drew 3 crosses on the wall, blah, blah, blah." Okay. Clear this filter. Okay, so that's the one-to-many. If you typed in social media, it would return these accounts. Now, there are newer social media platforms that weren't in existence in 2019. So or either that or they just weren't mentioned in the trials like Pinterest. So I didn't include them. Now, the many-to-many matches, what this does is it allows you, like for example, it will include aliases. So Alex was also referred to as Al and also Alexander. So if I search for Al, and these are exact matches, and this took quite a bit of finagling to get this, but if I search for AL, it's not going to include like always or altogether, words like that. But if I include related keywords, it's going to return references to Alex and Alexander as well. This snippet only, obviously, it just gives you like, it's most likely the first match from the article. So sometimes you might open up in an article and it might only have one match, whereas we saw with others, have, like, I pulled up one and it had more than 100 matches. And so that is an example of like that many to many. Now, this I kind of went back and forth over, but decided to also include their like zombie name if they were assigned a zombie name. Of course, I mean, no disrespect to the victims. I really kind of had to take off my aunt hat and put on my data scientist hat on this because I just think that this was, it made it more thorough, we'll just say. So, and sometimes there's also some overlap, like Melanie Pulowski and Melanie Gibb were both referred to as Mel. So, yeah, so if you search for Mel, it's going to include both of them. But you'll see here, Tammy, Tamara, Viola. Oh gosh, this is an HTML error. I'll fix that. It's missing. This was these were burial keywords. I'm just going to take a quick screenshot just so I remember to fix that. So sometimes if you have an HTML error, it just won't show up. I was working on some of these until very, very late last night or early this morning. Because of the live, it's being slow. Okay. Okay, so, oops. All right, so these are burial related keywords, casting. So if I put in, let's just say 7 gatherers. 7 gatherers. Actually, this one. Yeah, so this will be the same as searching for casting, castings, cast out, keywords like that. There was also, yeah, there were some other matches with that. Now, the 7 gatherers was only talked about at Chad's trial, so you can filter by 2024, and that is where we actually heard for the first time, and that is a mistake. I decided, originally I also had pendulum, and someone referred to the pendulum as a necklace, so that's why but I moved that to another keyword group. So I'll change that. But I think, yeah, this was the first time where, remember, John Pryor kept asking about seven gatherers and everyone was like, nope, never heard of them. And then, the one who had a plea deal was like, yeah. All right, yeah, we had a group called the Seven Gatherers. She said it was an email, but you can see here it has like casting related keywords, cast out, and I think, oh yeah, here's a reference to pendulum because they used a pendulum for these castings, and yeah, so you get the idea. Oh, another thing that I'll say is, let's say you want to watch the video from that day of the trial, then you can click view original article and that will pull up the East Idaho News article. So yeah, I think those are the main points. I will touch on one other thing. Go back to search. Okay, so I talked about the lexicon, the methodology. That's where, I just talk about like my approach, but I also talk about how, the East Idaho News is the sole data source for the app. But I have this tips page, and this will just give you like some tips, basically everything I just went over. There might be a few other tips that I didn't hit on, but yeah, that's essentially the app. The about talks about what drove this. One thing that I hate is that the only picture I have of Joe and me together was this picture that he wanted to take, and we had been outside and we were both like a sweaty mess. My hair had fallen, and now that is the picture that lives on in perpetuity. But I am glad that that I did it though. Okay, yeah, I think that's about it. Oh yeah, and then if you run into any bugs, you can just click this feedback link, and and yeah, and then this is the form. You could just say it's from the Daybell case. If you include the URL, then I can go right to that URL. And that's one of the things that I really love about the app is that, like, if you search for something, like for example, I'll search for bank because that's one of the many to many keywords we have. Well, let me finish going through this really quickly. Okay, so we have casting, we have dark spirit, all of those. This will also return matches for Garrett Smith, the attorney for the Coxes, Zulema, and the Pawlowskis. Oh well. Digital communication, again, you can search for any of these terms, and if you have related keywords toggled on, it will include all of them. And then evidence, this just talks a lot about, like, these lists aren't exhaustive. Like, this doesn't include all evidence related keywords, but it contains enough that it will take you to, particular testimony where those items were talked about. Or you might just look at the list and say, oh yeah, I want to see more about how they used lasers in analyzing the evidence. I have financial keywords, so like like we have Venmo, we have Cash App, and I just kind of, when I was coming up with these keyword lists, I was just kind of scanning through the different article pages and looking for similar keywords. With insurance, we had a $300,000 policy. That was one of Tammy's. She had an $80,000 policy. This was in reference to Joe's life insurance. But then I also, returned like the keyword million, And, you know, we had banner life, beneficiary, et cetera, et cetera. Mark Sari was the one, I think his name was Mark. He was the one who testified about insurance related stuff. And then we have law enforcement, location. This is specifically location data. And then pathology. This is a pretty long list. This, I was trying to find as many keywords as possible among these different forensic, you know, either forensic pathologists, we had a forensic anthropologist, and multiple, we had one coroner and multiple medical examiners testify. So obviously, if you search for any of these keywords and choose that toggle, it will return all of them. And then for some of them, it just got too, like, I included, you know, like, this is just saying, you know, I also include the plural form, or like decompose. We have decomposed, decomposed, decomposing, and then decomposition. And then probation, religion. So this includes like as many religious type keywords as possible. This is, you know, there are also like LDS specific keywords. Translated being, weapons. The weapons, I was really surprised. Just a lot of these came from Chad's trial, but yeah, yeah. So those are all of the many to many keyword groups. Okay, so that's it. That's all I have. But yeah, it's free to use. I am in the process of protecting it from trolls. So you know, but yeah, it's free to use. So okay, so I'll take a few questions, and then I will pack for my trip. Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, let me also pull up in case there's someone collecting questions. Just pull that up. Okay, yeah, I don't see any. Yeah, I don't even see that that group. Okay, all right, so if you have a question, please just put the word question in all caps. Don't put your whole question in all caps because it actually makes it pretty hard to read. Okay, is this only liked to trial data right now? I think you meant linked. If so, are you going to link this to the FOIA docs? So yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I was Garna asked me that today too. So it's only going to include trial and like data from the trials and East Idaho News. And the reason for that is that when I actually started building this, especially with having like the related keywords, there's a lot of data, and that's a lot of information for it to churn through, because I mean, we're talking more than 5 years worth of articles from East Idaho News, and what 2 years of trials. But so like I had to upgrade my server just because like the app kept crashing and it was very slow. There is one little bug that, like, if you hit the browser back button, sometimes, of course, it didn't happen in the demo, but sometimes like it will just get kind of hung up. But if you see that you're on the like the home screen, then if you just click or tap anywhere on the page, it will break it out of that. But so all that to say, I'm not going to be able to include the FOIA docs. One, I mean, this took a lot of time to build this app, and this is like my fifth app I've built in 6 months. And so, yeah, I need to get back to like focusing on my business, but also the hosting cost and even just the programming. Like I would have to build like basically a fully functioning search engine, and I would have pretty significant server costs. So yeah, so it's just going to include East Idaho News. Uh, but yeah, but then from there, yeah, I mean, people can do what they want. I will build my own app with the FOIA docs, but there's a big difference in cost when it comes to actually, putting it up on my site and having many people access it, because then you have to also have like it's called load balancing, so that it can be like distributed and stuff. Anyway, so no. Uh, mm, yeah, Karen. And Karen said, wait till Detective Hermosillo sees this. They had to do the research on their own. Yeah, it was kind of funny. I mentioned this in another live, but when I first started building the app and got it to a point where like I could start taking screenshots, I started learning so many things that I didn't know because I wasn't able to follow the first two trials because I was in school. So it ends up being kind of funny that like I finished this app and like now the next day I'll be getting on a train and going to my graduation, especially because I went back to grad school for data science because of this case. I wanted to be able, I had built that dashboard and but I was hitting walls because anytime you're working with software, you're limited by the limitations of the software. And sometimes those limitations really make no sense. And now that I've built multiple apps, I'm like, yes, a lot of these limitations in these different software programs, like they're silly. But anyway, so one of my clients wanted me to move their Tableau dashboards. Tableau is like a de facto standard, like a business dashboarding app. One of my kids was calling me. And that was what I used for the original dashboard I had built. But one of my clients wanted me to move all of their Tableau dashboards to to a platform where I would rebuild them using a programming language called Python. And when I started doing that, I started thinking about like the case, and I decided to go back to school so that when the FOIA docs were released after these trials, because I mean, originally, like Lori's trial, I think was supposed to be in 2021. And then it got moved to 2022. And anyway, so yeah, so my goal was to be able to like do everything with code so that when the FOIA docs were released, I could really, and not deal with these limitations. Plus, I knew that these would be very large files. We're probably at this point, we're not going to see the FOIA docs out of Idaho until after Brandon's trial. And then I think then we're just going to have a deluge of FOIA docs. But anyway, so I went back to school because I wanted to be able to do everything with code. Because the nice thing about code is, like I'm primarily working with Python and JavaScript. So you have these different libraries. If one library doesn't do what you want, you just pull in another library. Like all that keyword highlighting, that's a Python library that I use. And then the little, navigation arrows, that's a different library that I used. So, but anyway, so yeah, but I just had like the start of the app, and I was sending these screenshots to my mods, because I was like testing the app and finding different things like, whoa, I didn't know that. But and then it was like that later that day was the Dateline episode. Like I had just sent them some screenshots, and later that day the Dateline episode aired, and like I've said before, I didn't watch it, but someone sent me a clip from it where one of the agents from the FBI said that they had to process everything manually, and that they couldn't do keyword searches. But even if they could, they wouldn't have thought to search for raccoon. And I understand what he's saying to a point. But with data science, you have these, it's called machine learning. And one of the things that you can do with these machine learning models is it's topic analysis. So you can take massive documents and run it through a model, and it will identify topics. So if they had done that with this case, I can just about guarantee you it would have identified malachite as a topic. It would have identified fire as a topic. So yes, it wouldn't have identified raccoon, but the fire, like they could have had like just references to fire, because, like right before, just hours before Tylee was murdered and her remains were burned, Lori and Melanie Gibb released a podcast called "What is the Baptism of Fire?" Their like little podcast title was "Feel the Fire," or I think that was like the title of a series that they were doing. So, so yeah, there would have been quite a few references to fire, which, would have surfaced that. So, I mean, you can't get around manual effort, but there is a lot that AI and these machine learning models can do to really minimize a lot of that manual effort. Like if I didn't have the resources constraints that I have, like I would be able to create transcriptions using AI of all of these trials, and then feed an AI model with that. If I had access to all the data that law enforcement has access to, I was talking with Garna today about this, but like I would also have like all of the location data, so like all the GPS coordinates and stuff, and then you mash that together, and I would be able to add let's just say a map to a dashboard where if they zoomed in on a particular area, they would be able to see all of the text messages and shenanigans that were like performed in that area. So like, for example, Chad, on the day Charles was murdered, for some reason, Chad was in Utah, and he was very close to his hometown. Springfield, I think it is. Anyway, so it's just a curiosity, because obviously law enforcement, they have access to more information. Why was Chad, back in Utah that day? Could be something, could be nothing. Anytime you're investigating anything, whether it's a crime or, financial data or, any kind of data, you're throwing spaghetti against the wall, and some of it sticks, but yeah, so having access to data like that, because when they send a text message, it's hitting a cell tower, and that cell tower is nearby. And it even like measures the distance roughly from the cell tower, so you know like which cell tower it is. But you could like have pins on this map because these crimes spanned, you know, obviously Arizona and Idaho, but there were also shenanigans in Utah and Hawaii and, you know, and Missouri and, you know, who knows where else. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, I just think we're at the cusp of law enforcement titrating more data science into criminal science. Uh, and thank you, Petita. She says a great picture of Joe and me. I hate it, but I love that we have a picture. Oh, Felicia said the Seven Gatherers was my test subject to see how the app would work. I was pleasantly surprised to see info pop up. I mean, this is going to be the gift that keeps on giving. You know, and you know, I was even thinking about like when people would ask information about a particular trial, like during lives and Q&As. Like Q&As are going to be lit. Um, but you know, I kept having to say, you know, I really couldn't follow those trials, but now I have this. So, oh yeah, Jules said that picture of Tylee is beautiful. It's my favorite picture of Tylee. And yeah, those pictures, I just added them last night because I was like, the app's kind of missing something. So I just created an image with them. I had to Photoshop out Melanie Pulaski's big head to get just Brandon. But the picture of JJ is my favorite from the app. It doesn't like match the other pictures, but in my opinion, it just captures JJ's like sense of, you know, wonder and his whimsy. So, you know, he's throwing sand up in the air. It's a fantastic picture, whoever took it. Uh, thank you, Spooky Trash. That is hilarious. Okay, I'll scroll to the bottom. I'll also, thank you, Anna. I see she has some questions. It just really helps just to be able to like get right to it because otherwise I just scroll. Let me go to the beginning. I think some of these. Anna, did they start at 8:38? I can't tell where. Yeah, okay, the previous ones were. Okay. Does Nate have the link to share with his viewers if you're open to that? Yes. So I did an interview with Nate and with Garna. So they'll both show. I also contacted Justin. I haven't heard back from him. Fox might be like, we don't really want to share an app that is built on a competitor's live blogging. Okay, someone asked, will you be going to Brandon's trial? No, no. It's, I mean, I could justify going to Lori's. Well, I thought Lori's would be more interesting because I thought she would be playing evidence. I think, and I talked about this before, but she didn't present any evidence. Like, she didn't even counter, like, you know, different witnesses' statements with like, you know, like text messages or anything. And so I suspect, I could be wrong, but I wonder if her advisors advised her to not use any evidence because of the state's refusal to hand over the evidence that they were supposed to hand over. And they didn't hand it over until like I think we just had like a few days left of the trial. It was like sometime in week 2. And anyway, so I wonder if they just decided, you know what, we're not going to play any evidence, because in the event that they, you know, appealed, it would make the appeal, this is just my opinion. I wonder if they decided it would make the appeal weaker to say, well, yeah, we had some, like we had these reader files that the state handed over. But I've already talked, pretty extensively about the issue with the reader files. There were quite a few. But I mean, basically the state goes through and cherry picks, but there are limitations to these reader files. Like they can't access any deleted messages, or I mean, they can't do global searches, things like that. And so that really kind of hamstrings them. So the state did eventually turn it over, but very, very late. So because of that, like pretty much day one, I was like, well, this trial is a total waste of my makeup, because I was just like, I didn't know if she would present any evidence, and she didn't. And so, yeah. But the only way I could justify it is I was actually working on this app as I sat in the trial. But yeah, now at this point, I need to focus on rebuilding my business. That said, when the trial is finished, I will add all of those live blogging pages to the app. Marissa asked, do you think this will help Brandon's trial? Yeah, I do. I imagine you're a prosecutor, or, I mean, she has a constitutional right to a fair trial, so the defense could use it as well. But, I'll focus on prosecution. Imagine you're a prosecutor, and this trial won't be prosecuted by Trina. It's a different prosecutor. I forget her name. But, and you're trying to wrap your hands around this incredibly complicated case to be able to search across these trials. I think it could be very helpful for them. And especially because then, like what I do, if I then really want to dig in, which I will, like to that Venmo detail, like I actually want to find that in the video and get more details around it. But then what I do is I just pull up that particular day of the trial, because Nate always includes like, oh, Lori Vallow trial, like day 22. So I'll search for day 22, and then I use AI, like with a YouTube video. It won't work with like East Idaho News videos. But on YouTube, I just have like an AI powered Chrome extension I use, and that helps me find the reference in the video. And then, there you go. There's more detail there. So yeah, but I mean, like, one thing I was telling Garna today is, again, we're dealing with limitation. Like, even if I included the FOIA docs are heavily redacted. But like, if I were like, let's say I was working with, a different, I don't know, police force, or, some kind of criminal agency, or even just companies that deal with a lot of what's called unstructured data. So structured data is, just think of like a spreadsheet. You have rows and columns. It has a structure. Text, images, video, that's all considered unstructured data, because it doesn't fit in like a standard database. And so anytime you're dealing with unstructured data like text, it's just challenging to, like, how do you find insights from all of this text. So like I worked with one organization that they wanted to build an AI app for all of their HR documents. And they're a large organization, they're distributed, and and so we had to gather their data. They had some in in SharePoint, they had some in Google Drive, they just had these documents distributed in different, different like databases and stuff. Now imagine, like with this case, you had the FBI, you had the Idaho Attorney General's office, you had multiple police departments. So, Gilbert, Chandler, Rexburg, Fremont County Sheriff's Office, Phoenix Police. They also helped out with processing some of the evidence that Fremont County sent them. So, I mean, you have information in many different databases, and so that's a significant challenge. And it was interesting because even at Lori's trial, one of the detectives said he was talking about Cellbrite. So Cellbrite is pretty much a de facto software that law enforcement uses to process extraction files from phones, and they also call that like a dump of the phone. And so you have these extraction files, you bring it into Cellbrite, and Cellbrite just like kind of does like what I did with this app. It just makes it more accessible. And so the detective, I believe it was Detective Duncan, excuse me, said that that like it was challenging to match up some of this information, because with Cellbrite you have to, like, you can only look at one phone at a time. So he said, you had to then like log out of that one particular phone and then log into a different phone, and that made it challenging to find patterns and things like that. And I was sitting there just like, okay, well, what they should be doing, and I don't mean any disrespect, like these departments, they're dealing with a lot of times very limited budgets. And then also, I just don't think that law enforcement at this point sees their critical need for data scientists to join their teams. But what they should have done is taken these files, exported them, stored them in a database. Now you have all of these different, phone dumps in one database, and then you search across that database. So, and you can have one app that accesses all of these different, databases and, wherever else they're storing stuff, like, Microsoft SharePoint, things like that. So, with these apps, what you're doing is you're pulling the data from all of these different sources. Then you have to do what's called some data munging, like, like dates might be in a year / month / day format in one source, but then another source, it might be stored as text, or it might be stored as, excuse me, the month, the day, and then the year. And anyway, so you have to like, just kind of figure out, okay, for when we pull this together in the app, how are we going to standardize all of these different data formats? And yeah, and so doing that would have enabled them to then find patterns across these different phone dumps. Golden rule, yeah, I considered that. They asked to open up donations for a bit. I really did consider that. The problem is that it just opens me up. Like, I know, like, just people following the case, they're not aware like everything that happens, like, behind the scenes. But I mean, I basically have like one or two people at this point who are using multiple accounts, but they take advantage of every opportunity to say, oh, she's profiting off the kids' deaths, and things like that. So it just becomes pretty cumbersome, because I also like, people search my name for like data stuff. And when some of this stuff is said on these public forums, I mean, it's really the main reason why I don't do more interviews. Like, I was willing to do it for this app to be able to put it out there. I don't benefit in any way, but because I just want the app to be able to get out there. So, as I always like to say, the juice is worth the squeeze. But most of these platforms, they're not monitored. They don't do a lot of moderation, and so then my name is associated, like, other people, like I speak at conferences and things like that, and then my name is tied to some of these very serious allegations about, like, I'm the reason the kids died, and things like that. Or I'm profiting off of the deaths of children, things like that. So it's just not worth it. Besides that, like, I considered it for, like, including the FOIA docs, but I don't even know how much it would cost, because it wouldn't be until the app is out there and has, first of all, it would be like a lot of my time, and and time is money. Every hour that I'm spending on this case is time I'm not spending, really rebuilding my business, because I've spent so much time on this case. But anyway, so yeah, but it does serve as, like, a proof of concept, and even a prototype, for other agencies that may want to bring me in to do this, because, like, I was telling one person who expressed interest in it, I was like, like, if it was just your company using an app like this, then, I mean, it wouldn't be very expensive, because, like, for them, because I've already done most of the legwork, and they wouldn't be making something public, so they wouldn't have, they wouldn't have, like, all of the you know um the costs of, like, hosting and stuff. Okay. Okay. Oh, let me go back to these questions. Mm. Okay. Carolina said, Joseph Ryan's family law attorney did an interview with Justin Lum. He referred to Lori as a crime boss. I would agree with that. Not a smart one, not a sophisticated one, but she was driving the bus, in my opinion. Do you think the people not charged can be charged under RICO law in federal court? I remember looking into that back in early 2020, because some of the Facebook groups were talking about that. Now it's been too long for me to remember why I came to the conclusion that this probably wasn't a RICO case, because there are, like, pretty clear stipulations for RICO. I just don't remember what those are. But one thing I will say, so this actually reminds me of that. So when I was pulling together, I was pulling together, like, the religious keywords, and I saw a reference to Nephi, and it made me think, like, I think I was at the trial, and someone asked a question on A Murderous Heart, if, like, they thought that Lori had said she would be like Nephi, with Joe's death. And so I kind of like put that in the back of my mind, like, oh, I need to, check that out. And then it came up like somehow last night when I was doing this research, I was looking for something and I pulled that up and I have a transcript of that recording. And she did say that. She referenced that she was like Nephi. So even in that, like her little henchmen were like, oh yeah, no, she got that from Chad, Chad. And Lori even told, I will be like Nephi, I am told. No, girlfriend, you weren't told. This was you, even the Nephi detail, because she did refer to herself as Nephi in reference to Joe's death. But anyway, so all that to say, I don't know the answer to the Rico question off the top of my head, but I absolutely think that, I already was convinced. I did a whole live about like Chad and Lori's big fight on his birthday, or maybe the day after his birthday. And again, it was because of like I was building this app and I was, like testing things, because you want to stress test these apps to see like what breaks it and things like that. And I came across these text messages where Lori was talking about how she and Melanie were just so burdened that it was so hard dealing with these dark spirits of kids. And but anyway, and so yeah, I suspect that was the source of their temporary breakup. But yeah, anyway, okay. Let's see, Stephanie, is there anything in the data that mentions Charles' retirement or investment money? No. I wondered if at this trial if that would come up, but no. Trina spent like really the entire trial up until the last day just like trying to justify that murder scene and trying to justify it as being self or not self-defense, and trying to justify like, oh yeah, all of this evidence, this all lines up, this all makes sense, right? And it didn't. But yeah, in my opinion, she didn't even hit on conspiracy until the very last day, Detective Duncan. A little bit before his, but very, very, very subtle hints of it. But so I did wonder if more of like financial evidence would be brought in, just more that kind of, no disrespect to Trina, but I thought that like maybe they would focus more on like, okay, so kind of like back in Idaho, they really focused on the financial aspects, because that could, kind of bubble up to conspiracy. She thought she was getting $1 million, and maybe it just wasn't there. I think when you're talking about retirement, I don't think that would have been germane to conspiracy, but definitely I was hoping that we would hear something about the $2,000 cash that he had in a separate suitcase that they found in his hotel room, but we didn't hear anything. Wait, I just saw he's in the house, Ray. Yeah, so Ray Hermosillo, Lieutenant Hermosillo, it joined one of our lives when I was in Arizona, but because like I'm so focused on the information, I never saw it. So I don't know. I'm assuming that's the Ray Anna is referencing, but yeah, I will drop another link to the live, although, not to the live, sorry. I'm pretty tired, to the app, but my moderators might have also. But also you can go to annielytics.com and it's accessible from tools or from the homepage. You scroll down to the bottom. But Lieutenant Hermosillo, if you're here, welcome. All right, let me see. Yeah, someone said, uh-oh, Annie, can Lori Vallow use your app? I don't think Lori can. I don't think she has access to the internet. Her advisors can, but that is never something that, like, that's not a, I don't know. That's not a deterrent for me. Like, even like there are times I mention something in one of my lives and people will be like, you shouldn't talk about that. That could help the defense. I'm not trying to help the defense. It's not my job to help the prosecution or the defense. I'm covering like the facts, data, the details of the case. But I strongly believe like in our Constitution, and defendants have a constitutional right to a fair trial. And so I don't have problems with like if the defense can use something, like obviously that's not a primary motivation for me. And I mean, she can like she could use all of the best things that I have found to, help her. She's still not going to walk free. Like because they were dumbass criminals. Like, like even some of these details, like it, like I wondered if the defense would go with, like Lori killed Charles before he killed her. Like if she would have had like a Johnny Cochran, like a real defense attorney, or even like a Jim Archibald, like some of the things that like she hardly objected to anything the entire trial. Like I'm sitting there like she's testifying. She's like there was some detail that Trina shared in her closing argument that I sat there, I was like, you didn't present that in evidence. Like she talked about how that Lori lied about leaving the house barefoot because she was seen with sandals on when she walked into the Walgreens. I mean, Felicia found that. No, there may have been other channels that also found this, so I'm not, I don't have delusions of grandeur, but one of the A Murderous Heart moderators, Felicia, spotted it and sent me a screenshot, and I included it in my live that night. But to my knowledge, and I asked others if they remembered them, any of the witnesses testifying to her wearing shoes, and no one remembered her mentioning that. Oh, I should actually, I could use my app. Yeah, so I'll do a search for a sandal. Oh, wait. Do I have? Yeah, I have it in. But yeah, I'll look and see. There's only one match. Yeah, no, well, I mean, just because it's not in the app doesn't mean it wasn't mentioned, because I mean, I don't know how Nate captures as much as he does, and anyone who has followed this channel knows I'm not a flatterer. I mean, he gets so much information. Like I don't know how he's going to avoid carpal tunnel. But yeah, there is no mention of any of the witnesses saying that, like, they saw that she had sandals on, because I kind of doubt that they caught that. And but anyway, but then like Trina basically testified to something that wasn't in evidence. And so if Lori would have had an actual defense attorney who was worth their weight in gold, they would have objected. There were many things, and I mean no disrespect to Trina. Like, I'm so grateful. Hey, she got justice for Charles. I do think that by the end of day one, I strongly suspect between her and the judge, I strongly suspect they gave Lori at least 2 different grounds for appeals. And that was just on day one, with the extraction, with it was just a really weird bridge to die on for the state. I was like, there's no justification for this. And then the other one was the state cutting corners on pushing Detective Coons through as an expert witness and not ever providing the defense with his credentials. They were also supposed to, according to the protocols, from what I read, they're also supposed to present a summary of what he was going to testify to. I don't know if they provided that. There was no mention of it, but yeah, so the judge like shut that down, and he dismissed it by saying like, yeah, I I think you were just mostly, concerned about the timing because they did kind of switch him from a regular witness to an expert witness in the 11th hour. It was like right at the 30 days, so it had to be 30 days before, the trial essentially. And but he misstated her concern because I watched that. It was one of the few hearings I watched, and she was very clear about objecting to the state not providing his credentials. And I also learned that the defense is entitled to a special hearing. There's a name for it. I forget what it's called now, but where they can actually bandy about like the credentials. And I think they would have had grounds because like he did one, it was like a 40-hour course, and like the certification was like some dude's name, and I mean they called him world renowned, but I'm like, maybe not, but it's not like it was like, you know with some official agency or something. But anyway, so again, no disrespect to Detective Coons. It was just like, why are you doing this? Like, this is a really high profile case. Like, why cut these corners? And then for the judge, this is where like I really try not to like compare judges, but like, I know that a lot of people really didn't like Judge Boyce, but his attention to detail and his ability to hold both sides' feet to the flames, if anything violated, these defendants' constitutional right to a fair trial, he did it, because he wasn't like going for popularity. I'm not saying this other judge, Judge Bresky was, but like Judge Bresky just seemed to be at least in the beginning of the trial, showing preferential treatment to the prosecution. But anyway, we'll see. Okay. See, someone asked, "Is she colorblind?" I don't know what that means. Okay. Yes, Ginny's confirmed that Lieutenant Hermosillo is in the chat. That's great. Okay. I think. Okay. And Lieutenant Hermosillo said, other than you have to worry about chain of custody. So I don't know what that is in reference to. Oh, oh, I see. So someone asked where to get their hands on the blue dress I'm wearing. So it's a red blouse, but I got this on Amazon, and I can drop a link to it. I love it. It's so fun. Okay. In your interaction with Lori, did you sense that she truly loved Tylee, JJ, or do you think she was just upholding an image or obligation? Mm. So I definitely saw cracks in the foundation between Lori and Tylee. She was still loving in some ways, like being like this kind of fun loving peacemaker, And when she talked in one of her interviews about like avoiding confrontation and being a peacemaker, that particular detail, I was like, no, I agree with that, because like in her relationships with like Joe, Charles, Tylee, Colby, like they all had much stronger personalities than she had. And so she, again, I only had like cross sections with her, so I didn't have a lot of interaction with the family, but I did see Lori operating as like a peacemaker. Uh, and so she did that like with Tylee. Like Tylee was more the confrontational one. But then it was like, I think maybe the afternoon of day 2 that I was there, that's when she started saying things that were so inappropriate in front of Tylee. And I've talked about this before. Like, she said one thing and when Tylee really blew up. And I mean, it was so just, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just really heavy stuff, and then I just kind of had to process everything through that lens, because then she started making more of those comments. Now that I kind of have more of 100-foot view and know that she was already all in on these books, like she never talked about being a translated being or not needing to eat or anything like that, like she apparently did with Adam. But some of the things that she talked about, she was very, very fearful of the end times, but it was more like she was trying to convince me because I'm not LDS. And, I think she was like more afraid for me. And, but anyway, so, uh, yeah, so I definitely saw this friction between her and Tylee. With JJ, really the only thing, like she was very nurturing toward JJ, very protective of him. Like I've talked about this before, but like I'm a runner, so I would go out for runs in the morning, and I remember her saying like, "Oh, remember when you come back, you have to put the key up on this shelf." So they, had a shelf that was high enough that even if JJ climbed up on one of the dining room chairs, he wouldn't be able to reach the key because he was a runner. And well, a different kind of runner than I am. And so like she was really, really careful with those things. The only thing she wasn't careful with, and I didn't judge her because I'm like, well, I don't think I had ever even interacted with an autistic child before that, but they weren't able to keep him in a car seat or even a seatbelt. So we would drive places and he would be like climbing over the seats and stuff. And I could tell Lori felt uncomfortable, like I would be judging her. But, she explained, oh, we can't keep him in a car seat or a seatbelt. But other than that, like she was very, very nurturing. The only crack there was one time, it was one of those things like, like you remember where you were when you talked. So we were talking in the kitchen. And the reason I remember was this was when I got what I call drive-by hugging from JJ, because he had run these circuits and he broke his circuit and ran through the kitchen where Lori and I were standing and gave me a hug, nearly knocked me over, and then just kept on running. But when we were talking, she told me that they had been asked by a family member to take JJ, and that that like that was kind of easy for Charles to say because Charles is gone all the time. So she said something to the effect of like he leaves me to, be the main one who has to take care of JJ and, like be woken up all through the night and stuff. So that was the only crack where it seemed like there may have been like the beginning of a midlife crisis, or just dealing with the reality of like she would probably, like JJ would probably never be able to live independently, things like that. And but yeah, other than that, like I didn't see anything that would suggest what actually happened. But I've shared this text exchange I had with one of my kids, and I described the house as quote dark AF, and I couldn't wait to get out of there. So um but even with that, even with some of that, but that was like more of like her obsession with like talking about, all these ways that Joe abused Tylee, when ostensibly I was there to be a support to Tylee, but also I was dealing with the fact that, I just, that he died, and, like he didn't have a funeral, like there was nothing, and I had just reached out to him like a like less than a month before. That at this point I didn't realize, I didn't make the connection that when I reached out to him over Messenger to let him know that our mother, who had been homeless, had died and no one was looking for her, that like he was already dead and waiting to be found. So I didn't like put all of those things together, but I knew I had just reached out to him, and it was like because he was on my mind so much, and so there was just a lot to process. And I mean, she was just being so unbelievably callous and insensitive at minimum. So, but it never occurred to me, like, I wonder if she played a role in his death. That never crossed my mind. Uh, I don't really understand this. Will something show up if we look up horrorcore or okay, yeah, so no. Yeah, uh, core horror. There's horrorcore. I've never heard either of those. Core horror. Yeah, no, because those aren't referenced in Charles. Uh, why do you think no one expresses any concern for Charles' sons? Does anyone know how they are? This is They were on my mind so much at the trial, and it was I'm walk I'm going to try to treat this as delicately as possible. I have no inside information. I did wonder if they would come at least like for the verdict, but they didn't come at all. And I did wonder. I don't know. This is just me thinking out loud whether I should or not. I don't know. But they were at part of Lori's trial, and I just wonder if they, mm, how do I put this? I just wonder if they had concerns about being bullied, because they most likely would have been privy to how I was bullied at that trial. And again, I don't mean any disrespect to anyone, but like the victim's advocate, like they were representing, like they did not represent my daughter and me at all. And I mean, to the point of a family member told us that we would need to move to a different seat because they wanted our seats. And my daughter, I mean, she is just like, I tend to be a little more like, in situations like that, like whatever. I mean, I wasn't willing to give up the seat just because like the person didn't even ask. They were just like, you're going to need to move. And so, I was basically like, you're going to need to piss off. I didn't say anything. I just got up, went to the restroom, but my daughter was like, absolutely not. Like, who do these people think that they are? And but then when we came back, the victim's advocate actually came over to us and told us that we would need to move to give these other family members the seat so that she could keep an eye on one of them. I mean, it was just, and my daughter was still like, then you move, but at that point, like I didn't want a scene. They were about to start, and I probably was wrong. We probably should have gone with my daughter's decision. But anyway, but all that to say, like there was there just wasn't protection. It was like, and so I do wonder, especially with some of the information that came out about the life insurance and all of that. And I just wonder if they just felt like, it's not worth it. It's not worth potentially, being mistreated. And because, also like there is one room for all of the victims, and so someone at one point said, like, you're a family member, like you would be able to, you know, like go in with the victims and stuff, but there was no way I wanted that. Several days I was the first person in line. Like I would be there at like, I don't know, 5:45 or something. 5:30. No, I was there closer to 5. And but that was still way better than, like dealing with going into the victim's room. So, I don't know if that was the case, but uh, uh, yeah. I mean, on a personal level, I'm glad that they weren't further victimized, but I just don't think like these victim services, I just don't think they account for there are times where, all is not like, rainbows and I don't know, whatever between victims. And so, so it's like you either choose to be victimized more or to forgo. That's why, like, and again, this isn't a flex. This was just me protecting my mental health. And also, I was in like my last 2 weeks of grad school when I flew to Idaho for, to make the victim impact statement. But I was in the hotel room when the verdict was announced, just because I was like, I just don't want to deal with all of that. But anyway, so it was sad. I love Charles' sons. Like I got to hang out. My daughter and I got to hang out with them when we were all in Idaho for Lori's trial, and I just think the world of them. Like they were as amazing as I remembered them being when they were kids. Okay. Oh, Ray clarified. Other than you have to worry about the chain of custody, putting info in some database that an attorney can say is tampered with. Yeah, yeah, well, yes and no. So when Detective Coons was talking about like we have to log out, log back in that case, like they would have had full control of that database. If you're talking about, like using an app to, pull data from these different databases, the way that you could potentially, deal with that is you just set permissions. So, so there are, laws in place, which you know better than I do, obviously, like what can be shared among, like these different agencies. And you could have a common database for just that information. So, and there are ways like, you just put really, really strict permissions so that, only people with the proper credentials are able to access that database. So, but in that particular case, where if you were talking about like the Cellbrite data, that could have all been in their own database that they had complete control of. Uh, do you think being alone to parent was one aspect that made her crack, overwhelm? Yeah, I do. And like I think like nothing justifies what Lori ultimately decided to do. And and after after like some of the research I've done, I've made it clear I think Lori was absolutely driving the bus, you know, directing the orchestra. I mean, obviously Chad was all in. I think that they were kind of like a uh, Bonnie and Clyde, yeah. But like when you look at some of these cases where, particularly where mothers murder their children, I always look at them and try to figure out like what happened. Is there some lesson that can be learned in this, and I do think that, and I'm not privy to the discussions that they may have had about, adopting another, child from the family, because Charles adopted another child from the family. One of his other sons is adopted, and so obviously I don't have any insight into what that discussion looked like, but but I do know, and I may regret sharing this, but like, my husband and I adopted a child, and I mean, I love this child like they're my own child. We got the child at 5 days, and and went to the hospital, and but it wasn't planned. Like, social services was like, we have a newborn in the hospital that needs to be picked up today. Can you get this child? Like, we didn't even have a car seat or anything. But in our case, I was pressured to adopt, to even do this, because I was in a similar position that Lori was in. So I have no regrets about the actual adoption. I love this child. We were foster parents and then adopted. But I do know what that feels like. And my husband at the time actually started the process without me. And so yeah, it was. So I don't know, but I do suspect that it definitely played a role. I suspect, and I've talked about this before, like, I suspect when Lori started reading these books and found out about, like, there was this whole community, between Preparing a People and AVAL, like they were, they were similar in their mindsets and stuff. Um, and and then I'm sure, she saw them like meeting up at all these conferences and talking about, these different events and stuff. And here she had a child where, her husband traveled a lot. And, um, and I just wonder how much she was like, I'm tired. of being a mom. That doesn't justify anything that she did. Like they made the decision to adopt JJ. I don't think at the time they knew he uh, was autistic. That came up in one of the trials. I should actually search the app for that, because I remember thinking that, like, I think it was when Kay testified. I remember thinking, like, oh, he was older than I thought he was when he was diagnosed, because I think he was around like maybe 18 months or something. But anyway, so I don't, even like when Lori emailed me to say that they were in Louisiana, picking up this child, she didn't mention anything about autism. So I don't know. That's a question mark. But yeah, so I I just wonder if, like, did she have the services she needed? Did she have the support she needed? I don't know. I mean, it's still, none of it would justify what she did. Obviously, can't overstate that. But I do I do I have multiple times questioned if that played a role, because he was so sweet, but he was a lot of work. And and that's not the best way to put it, but you know what I mean. Like, he needed, not constant supervision, but pretty close to, like, they had apps on the iPad that helped, and they had like these systems in place that helped him. And Bailey was a huge, huge asset. That's why, yeah, I've said so many times, I think one of the most understated sufferings that JJ experienced was losing Bailey. Like, that had to be an absolutely devastating loss, because at the same time that he lost his dad, didn't know he lost him, thought he was on a business trip, lost access to all of his extended family. Soon after moving to Idaho, within a week, lost Tylee. Like, his world was just collapsing, and he didn't have Bailey. So, yeah, anyway. Um, were any of the family members friendly to you? During Lori's trial, like Cheryl and Nicole and Zach, they were very friendly. And I've talked about this before, but Rex and his wife were very friendly. And even at this last trial, like, Rex has always been very friendly. And I think I don't know. I mean, at Lori's trial, Vicky and her daughter were very friendly, but then, like, she got in with the whole Lauren crowd and learned that I'm apparently deplorable. And I learned in Arizona, there was also a rumor that I'm a raging alcoholic. So I don't know how I missed all the signs. I thought, only having a few drinks a year would have kept me safe, but what do I know? Anyway, okay, I think that is it. Oh, wait. Okay. Yeah, I think that's it for the questions. So thanks for joining. And yeah, I think that the app will, I think it's going to make our Q&As a lot more interesting. But there are some topics I already kind of have in mind to cover in lives, but just have to get through this graduation, and then we'll get back to it. But have a great night.